Welcome to Diversity. My name is Kevin Nyango, co-founder of the platform. The platform talks about soft skills or those characteristics that attract opportunities all employers are looking for. But today, I am not alone. Today, I am with one and only Irungu. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you very much. I'm very privileged to be on this show, and thanks for
No,
the invitation.
thanks for responding to my request. I will go straight to the point, Irungu. If you don't mind me asking, so you work for Amnesty International Kenya?
Yes, Kevin. I joined Amnesty International Kenya in January 2018. I'm coming up to my 4th year, and over the last 4 years, I've essentially worked with a team of investigators and campaigners committed to human rights protection and the promotion of human rights in Kenya.
Talking about human rights, having employment, having meaningful employment, that is human rights.
The right to work is a recognized right. It is the most important right that the International Labour Organization is founded upon, but it is also enshrined within our constitution in Kenya, and I believe also in many constitutions across the world.
Well, but lots of young people are out of work, so are we failing somewhere here then?
Yes, I mean, I think the first thing that we have to recognize is that laws and constitutions are only as good as their implementation and their enforcement. And in many cases where power and privilege is skewed towards small, small numbers of populations, many people do not enjoy those rights, whether it be the right to work, the right to health, or the right to education.
So do we? I mean, I don't take this route, but you started it. So should we blame governments for not creating conducive environment for creating meaningful work?
I think blame is important, particularly when it builds a sense of accountability. It is the case that states exist primarily to promote, to protect, and to fulfill human rights. There's no other reason that a state should exist. And where there is a colossal failure in terms of unemployment, in terms of medical negligence, in terms of forced evictions from people's homes, that state loses its credibility in the eyes of the public.
So the buck stops with the government, with the president, really?
Well, the buck stops at different levels, yes. I mean, I think states and, for that matter, heads of states, leaders, whether they be prime ministers or presidents, are primarily responsible for discharging the responsibilities of a state and therefore must be held accountable. But I think it's also important to recognize that, power exists also within citizens, and therefore citizens have an obligation to demand and to claim rights, and that is part of an obligation of being a citizen in a country.
And Amnesty International have got the tools, experience to kind of help citizens to kind of claim that kind of right, isn't it? And so I'm going to ask you, so what are you guys doing then?
So Amnesty International has been in existence for 60 years. In fact, 2021, we celebrate 60 years of the protection of human rights. And, it would be impossible in a short show like this to be able to capture all that we've been able to do over the last 60 years. But I can just focus on Kenya, for example. Kenya has had a Amnesty International office for about 10 years now. Over these 10 years, we have trained and educated young people on their rights and responsibilities. We have highlighted the dangers and called for justice for people who have experienced forced evictions. We have also called for justice for victims of police brutality. We have essentially worked on issues like, for example, the right of all Kenyans to have a COVID-19 vaccine and to be kept safe from this miserable little virus that affects us, not just in Kenya, but all over the world. This has been our mandate over the years. And although, we do not have a country that is a match for the constitutional ambition that we have in the 2010 Constitution, I think our record is fairly clear in terms of the results that we've been able to deliver. And this includes, for example, reducing levels of police brutality with organizations like the Police Reforms Working Group and Missing Voices, but it also includes Haki Jamii and various other socioeconomic rights organizations to keep alerting the state to its responsibility under Chapter 4, the Bill of Rights in Kenya.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned you want to put Kenya into context. And I think it will be very unfair of me not to talk about those two brothers that were killed. I think it was in Embu, I think, wasn't it?
Yes.
And so I suppose what I want to ask you is, should young people feel safe? Because they know that if we raise our voice, if we raise our voices in terms of political brutality, we can run to people like Amnesty International to help and support us and give us that voice. Could young people do that, and do they do that?
I think, first of all, let me just really just acknowledge the pain of the family of Benson and Emmanuel Dwiga. This is the two men, both of them university and polytechnic students, who lost their lives. They were killed in circumstances that yet have not come before a court of law. We know that they were in police custody at the time. The police version of the story is that they fell out of a police vehicle. The autopsy that was carried out on Thursday last week demonstrate that their injuries perhaps suggest possible assault, and therefore there are questions that we must ask of the National Police Service. Secondly, that the management of the protests that took place after the bodies were found have left at least one person dead, and therefore we must ask questions also about how the aftermath was managed. But I think as Amnesty International, we will continue to call for justice in moments like this. We will continue to protect and support families of victims, and we will continue to train people across the Republic on how they can support the reporting and the investigation of these incidents. And obviously the first thing that citizens must be able to do is to have the courage to report these incidents, to identify witnesses, and to have them brought particularly to the Independent Policing Oversight Authority so that they can be documented and actionable intelligence can be given to our investigators so that they can bring perpetrators to a court of law, and those perpetrators alleged or suspects can be placed on their defense, and justice can be sought again in a court of law, not in the public corridors of social media or on the streets of Kenya.
Well, sir, I'm glad you mentioned about training young people how they can report these cases. I will come back to that in this one. For those that are just joining us, this is University School of Soft Skills podcast, and I'm talking to Irungu Houghton, the Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya. Irungu, I want us to talk about soft skills really, and this is in relation to getting employment. And when we were starting this podcast, you talked about there is right to work, meaningful employment really. And is it fair, or is it true that actually academics or universities are producing unemployable young people?
No, I think that would be probably a gross simplification of the challenges that people have in facing jobs. I mean, I think there are a number of reasons why it is difficult to find jobs. I think the economies that we are producing in this country do not lend to labor-intensive projects. I think new technologies are reducing the scope for employment. Thirdly, I think curriculum in many cases does not produce what you're calling the soft skills that allow people to be effective. And I think it's a number of things. I think it is also hard skills, the ability to be able to write and to read effectively, the ability to communicate vividly, and the attitudes or the aptitudes that are required for people to be proactive and to be challenging of the environment. I often say that neither circumstances nor chances produce leaders. Only choices, bold choices, produce leaders. And my own experience was, I came out of university in 1991. I walked across the streets of Nairobi. I probably would do 2 visits from what we used to call GPO or Harambe Haile Selassie Avenue to University Way, and I would walk the length of the central business district, literally looking for work. And in many cases, I didn't quite know what I was looking for. I knew that I wanted to teach, and at that time, there were no universities that were recruiting people. This was the period when the late Minister of Foreign Affairs, Robert Ouko, had been killed, and therefore there were demonstrations across many of the universities, and therefore the universities were not recruiting. Many of the campuses were closed. And so I just walked back and forth, and I literally would look for friends who were working and bump into the office. I knew it was bad manners to go into offices and ask for jobs. But what I did was I found excuses to become relevant to people. And my break came when I walked into the offices of an organization called the African Association for Literacy and Adult Education. And I didn't even know what to ask them because I didn't know what an NGO did in 1991. And it's really strange that 30 years later, I've spent my entire life working in NGOs. But at the time I walked into that office, I didn't know what to ask. So I just asked them, like a good student would ask, do you have a library? Do you have a resource center? And they showed me to a library, and then 8 hours later, I walked out with a couple of books, having noticed that they published and printed these books, and just asked them, would it be okay if I bought these books? And they said to me, no, Irungu, we don't sell these books. We give them away for free. We have donors that give us books, funding to enable us to print these books. So I offered to write a critique, a review of one of the books. And it so turned out that the review that I wrote was actually of a book that was written by the executive director of the organization. And what was most interesting about that moment was that, having come out of a history degree, I was extremely rigorous in my critique of the book. In fact, at some point, I was bluntly honest that the author had misunderstood the concept of public participation. And then I got a letter from the author and, of course, the executive director, who said, come into the office, let's talk. And in a 30-minute conversation, I persuaded him that, to hire me. And that was my first, professional break. So I think, remaining proactive, remaining present and propositional always produces opportunities.
Wow, I mean, that's an amazing story. And I wish people will visit again. So what you talk about here is like people need to be proactive and also be innovative in terms of looking for opportunities. But there has to be environment, though.
Say it again, sorry.
But there has to be that environment that is conducive for young people to kind of feel like, I can go out. In Swahili, we say kujituma yani. Like, they can actually go out and do what they want to do. But they're not doing that right now. So people are actually just looking for work through selling CDs.
Yeah, but I would really challenge this idea, and I'm sure I'm going to annoy some of your viewers. Circumstances and chances are important. And I'm not saying that they're not important. But what is more important is what I would call a way of being that makes you, employable, right? That makes you relevant to people. I often used to say to people, when I was starting off working, there was a common phrase that said, it's not what you know, but it's who you know that is important. And I thought about that a lot, and very early in my career, I realized that actually it's not so much who you know, it is important to know people. It is important to network and to have links and to be engaged and interactive. But it is much more important who knows you, right? So making yourself noticeable, making yourself interesting, making yourself relevant to what people are doing is much more important than having people's telephone numbers. I can't tell you how many people will call me looking for work, and I just don't have any way to support them or to be able to give them the kind of opportunities that they exist. I probably receive, as Amnesty, we probably receive maybe, I don't know, 5 to 15 requests, minimum every week. And we have a staff profile of 18 people. And therefore, there is no way that we can provide the kind of space that is needed by people who want to work on human rights. But what is important is really watching people use the different platforms that are available, that were not available when I was looking for work. Social media is a tremendous platform for people to market themselves, to market themselves as thought leaders, as people who are resourceful, and people who have perspectives. And when I'm looking for people to do consultancies or to take up positions, it is to those spaces that I look at people. So I immediately, whenever I come across somebody's CV, I look online. What kind of a digital footprint do they have? And really, I'm looking for people who are disruptive, who are propositional, who are thinking about the kind of issues that I'm interested in. And those are the people that I turn to first and foremost.
Well, I was
not so much circumstances, but really choices and ways of being.
Well, I'm glad you brought the issue of internet. And first of all, Irungu, I will tell you for sure, when I put this poster app that I'm talking to you, lots of friends, people that I've known for years, ask me to give you your contacts. Like, they want to work, they want to come work at Amnesty International. So I can appreciate the number of applications you receive on a daily basis of an opportunity. Now, let's talk about internet and bullying as well. And clearly, internet work. I've never met you. We've just been corresponding online. Obviously, I was introduced to you, but we have been corresponding online. So actually, social media is quite powerful, and it has made this happen. But there is an element of bullying. And again, I want us to put Kenya into context here. And there is that mentality that the more vulgar you are online, probably the more powerful you look. Isn't that a cake, or is that working for people?
So I think there are two things. It is definitely the case that this generation, this moment that we find ourselves, not just in Kenya, but all over the world, there's a friend of mine called Taka Awori, and she says that this period, this context can be summarized in the term VUCA, right? And VUCA is VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, right? And that this, to be a leader in this moment is really to be able to surf this context, to be able to ride this context. And I think there's some truth in that. I think, leadership is not has never been how well you divide people. It has always been how well you unite people on values and ethics that actually take society forward. If we think about, this moment, it is not the divisive toxicity or the hate speech and the kind of disinformation that we will really remember 10 or 20 years or 30 years from now. It is the people, both the men and women, that are capable of actually taking forward a country or a nation or an issue in a way in which we see some resolution, right? So I think there are a lot of people who are dabbling with social media and essentially using it to create a surge or a trend or a hashtag that gets people's attention. But the question we would want to ask them is 50 years from now, will they look back and see that they have done something that was at the scale of either the Mau Mau of the 1960s or Wangari Maathai of the 1980s or the second liberation leaders of the 1990s. And I think, that's the aspiration that I always ask people, are you aspiring or designing your careers in a way in which over your lifetime, you will leave behind something that others can pick up and lead on? And secondly, things that will touch the lives of millions of people. I mean, I know this from my own 30-year professional career. The things that really mattered is not how many interviews I did with CNN, SABC, CCTV, and others. It is really the work that I did with others to protect playgrounds across, tens and hundreds of schools across this republic. The action that we took at the Langata Road Primary School was completely unplanned in many ways. Yes, we knew we were going to the school. We knew we were going to reclaim that playground for the 800 children that went to school there. But we didn't really plan it in the context of the fact that we at that time did not know that up to 40% of our schools had no title deeds. That something like 20,000 schools were at risk of land grabbing or encroachment. And that by designing a program with the National Lands Commission and the Ministry of Lands, we could actually get a presidential decree or an executive order that would lead to 14,000 schools receive title deeds in less than 5 years, right? Now that's a legacy that is more interesting than how many people follow me on Twitter or how many trends I've been able to do in the course of a month. And I think we have to challenge ourselves to think bigger than our egos, bigger than our our fellowships, to really thinking about, are we producing leaders who can take on issues after us?
Well, I like the way you're talking about, your legacy, really, what you'll be able to do in Kenya. But I like us to concentrate on that person that has just finished university, and looking for employment. And I want, obviously, we've got to talk about politics. Should young people be vocal in terms of the injustices that they're going through? Or should they be quiet because that can portray them as being rebels? As you say that nowadays, when, like, for example, in my role, what I do, what pays the bill, when people are looking for employment, the first thing I look at, obviously, I go online, see what they've done, and lots of people kind of get scared, or they kind of they get cold feet to talk about injustice because they think they'll be seen in a different direction. As an experienced professional, what do you say about that?
No, I've been working, Kevin, for, I guess it's now 30 years. I mean, this is, I think, my third decade of employment. If I look back over those 30 years, what is most important to me is not necessarily the trajectory of jobs that I held. It's not even perhaps the responsibilities that I managed. It is really the moments when I had impact on large numbers of people, right? So I always say to people who are starting their careers, there are probably three distinctions that are important. The first is, it's not so much learning that is important, it is unlearning in terms of soft skills. Yes, it is critical that we learn to be able to write well, to be able to manage projects well, to be able to communicate well. But ultimately, we have to recognize that underneath these hard skills, there is a soft skill that we have to learn, which is that, it is really, boldness, moments of boldness in the face of uncertainty is what produces legacies and vivid memories, right? We are by nature creatures of habit, right? We are creatures of comfort. We want to be safe. We want to be comfortable. We design our careers essentially for comfort, We are more preoccupied with our salaries and benefits rather than the reason that we have those jobs in the first place. And I'm not saying that, paying bills is not important. I'm not saying that having a roof over our heads is not important. These are all very important things, but they are the minimum expectations that we should have. it's often said that, ships are the safest when they're in ports, when they're in harbors.
Yes.
But it's not why they're designed. They're not designed to stay in harbors. They're designed to go out into the seas and essentially discover, transport, connect. And that's why they're designed. And I think, we can learn a bit from, the analogy that as human beings, we are designed not to be comfortable, not to be, safe at all times, but really to be stretched and to be created so that we can take on greater levels of risk without getting hurt. Two things I would leave listeners with this evening. One is those that you fear control you, right? Those that you fear control you, whether it be your line managers, whether it be the people around you, whether it be peer pressure. That is your limit for full self-expression and ability to create your careers. And the second one is this: those that fund you ultimately own you, right? Now, I joined two international organizations and had an interesting negotiation when I was joining them. The first was ActionAid in 1996. The second one was Oxfam in 2003. In both of those negotiations, I was offered contracts for longer periods than I wanted to work with those organizations. And it sounds crazy, right? Both of them offered me larger sums of money than I had expected. And therefore, on the money side, there wasn't a very tough negotiation, but there was a tough negotiation on the length of the contract. And in the case of ActionAid, I actually turned down an open contract, so a permanent contract, in favor of a 2-year contract. In the case of Oxfam, I turned down an open contract in favor of a 1-year contract. And the reason for both of those negotiations was because I was not sure that I would have the independence to do what I wanted to do with those two organizations, because they were large international organizations. I was starting my career, of course, in 1996. I had been working for 5-6 years. In 2003, I had been working for about 10 years. I still that I was in the right place, but I was willing to try. So I actually asked for contracts that were shorter to allow us the opportunity to just see whether we were a match for each other. In the case of ActionAid, I worked ultimately between 1996 and 2002. So I spent 6 years with that organization. I then spent 10 years with Oxfam. But I think the moral of the story is that, retaining a sense of purpose and a sense of independence, even from your employer, sometimes is a very powerful way of being able to determine what it is that you want to bring to that organization. And ultimately, it is what I brought to those organizations that led them to give me repeat contracts.
And that's a very unusual. So I would say that's a very unusual way of getting employment. Not many people would be that kind of position.
Yeah, I even look back now and I think it was slightly crazy. But the important thing is really just thinking about why you want to work for a particular employer and being able to vividly create that for your employer or a potential employer so that they are enrolled with your vision for the organization. Too many of us, don't come with that kind of vision. We essentially want to just fit in. When I left Oxfam after 10 years, I was in a really interesting space. I hadn't written a CV for 10 years. I had never looked at another organization for 10 years. I was so branded, Oxfam, that I think in some ways I couldn't think outside of that organization. So I went for some coaching, and a wonderful woman, took me for lunch, and she said to me, Irungu, there are only 4 questions you need to answer to be able to change career powerfully. And this advice is as useful for people starting their careers as it is for those in a midterm career change. And the 4 questions were, which job would be your ideal job? And it's not a theoretical question. She asked me to name an individual who had the job that I wanted. The second question was, who do you want to work with? If you were given the opportunity to create a dream team, who would you create and why? And it forced me to think about the people that I knew. And in many cases, I didn't have a clear idea of who I would want to work with. But this, you know, I then went away and thought about who would be the team or the set of skills that I would want in my team. The third point was, what budget would you want? I was like, whoa, you mean like, you know, an amount? And she said, yeah. What would be the budget? Forget your salary and your immediate terms and conditions, but what would be the budget that you would want to create to work on? And the fourth one, which is the most important one, what impact do you want to leave in the world? Now, once I had asked those 4 questions, actually jobs began to show up for me. You know, not as some esoteric general conversation in my mind, but actually, you know, something like, I want to be the director of Amnesty International Kenya. I want to work with the following kind of people. I want to have a budget of this level. And secondly, I want to have this impact in the world out there, begins to show up clearly. And I think that's something that, you know, often we forget when we're thinking about working. Yes. We tend to have a general thing, or even we are so ready to be employed that actually doesn't matter which job. How many times have we said, I can do any job? I can sweep the floor. Yes. I can, you know, I can clean the washrooms. I can carry your briefcase, Buona Director. Yes. But rather than thinking about, you know, this is the impact I want to leave in the world out there, and that's why this job is important to me. That conversation is not enough. You know, it's not created well enough for many of us.
Honestly, I wish someone told me 10 years ago. I mean, it sounds simple, but also it makes one think what they want in life, isn't it? And what kind of life they want to live. When someone applies to your organization, do you actually look for soft skills? I know you say that you go online and see what they've done, but do you purposefully look at some of the soft skills they have? For example, leadership skills, ability to communicate well, how to write. Do you look at that, or you look at the school? Which school are they going to? Group of schools? Yes, no. Because I'm going to do that. You know, like if you went to Oxford, you'll probably get an interview compared to someone who went to Shaba High School. See what I mean?
Well, I mean, you'll be interested. Most of I don't know if it's most of the staff now, but quite a few of my the leaders that work for Amnesty at the moment, you know, they come from places like, you know, Moore University. They come from, you know, universities that are local, Strathmore, and other places. So, you know, in a sense, there are 2 things with Amnesty International Kenya. First of all, we don't recruit internationally. This is a matter of choice. We could have expatriates working for us, but we don't. We choose essentially Kenyans, you know, over non-Kenyans.
So all your staff are actually Kenyans?
All of our staff are Kenyan.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, it may not be the case forever, but you know, as far as I know, it has been the case in Amnesty International Kenya for many years. We are committed to local leadership, and because much of our work is contextually driven, particularly now in our new strategic plan, we are really interested in creating circles of conscience, groups of human rights defenders in all parts of the country. And to do that, you know, we are looking for people to come to Amnesty with a certain set of qualities. So let me come back to your very first question, which was, you know, what do we look for in the recruitment processes? And, you know, I've been involved in a lot of recruitment over the last 6 months. I think we've recruited something like about 10, 11 people. We have sifted through 1,700 CVs. Wow. We have brought maybe out of those 15 positions, we probably, actually not, sorry, out of those 10 positions, we have probably interviewed about 50 people over the last 6 months. And I think there's a kind of a pattern for me. The first is, you know, that from the CV, first and foremost, that the skills that they profess, that the skills are a match for the essential and the desirable skills that are in the job description. So I often tell people, listen, don't copy paste your CVs. Write your CV so that it speaks specifically to the skills that are essential for this position. Because if you're looking at 150 CVs, you don't have time to really get into the specificity of a CV. What you're looking for is a match between skills that we need and skills that the applicant has. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I look for is voluntarism. I'm interested in people who are leading voluntarily, right? Because so much of our work is built on passion and a sense of commitment that is much more demanding than a paycheck at the end of the month. So I look for leadership in the spaces, whether it be student leadership, whether it be community leadership, whether it be women's leadership, and so on. The third thing that I look for is in the interviewing and the pre-interviewing process, I look for vibrance. I look for proactiveness. I look for a hope-based communication style that actually is able to convince people. You know, one of the things that as human rights defenders we have to do is we have to bring hope to and light to situations that are really dark, uncertain, and uncomfortable, right? So I'm looking for people who have gone beyond complaining. I'm looking for people who are committed to change, who may have a theory of change, but more importantly, have a belief in change, right? They don't have to know how to do it, but they have to believe that we will not always be this country that is so unequal, that is so riddled with corruption and abuse of office, because those are the people that will bring the change that Amnesty is committed to, not the people who are descriptors, who can describe the problems really well. We're looking for people who want to transform those situations. So that's what we look for in the pre-interview tasks that we give people. And then in the interviews, I'm looking at somebody who can express themselves powerfully, right? Who don't need to have everything clear for themselves, but are in the inquiry, in the curiosity of how does transformation happen, and is willing to keep going at it until they get the results that they want. In many ways, justice is not a destination, but it is a road that we have to walk daily, right? It's often been said, the price of eternal freedom is the price of eternal vigilance and action, right? That's who I'm looking up. That's who I'm looking for as we do recruitments for Amnesty International Kenya.
Can you train? Can you teach passion? Or you either have it or not? Can someone teach it?
You can create the conditions for passion to emerge, and as we speak to each other, we can either speak the language of empowerment, the language of confidence, the language of responsibility, and that's a 100 responsibility language, which is, I don't care what your circumstances are, I don't care what chances you've been given in life. All I care is how you articulate what is important to you and how you want to go after it. That's what's important in the world of transformation. The rest is, simply background information. The foreground has to be always the passion. But you raise an interesting question. We sometimes say information is power, right? We sometimes say knowledge is power, and we have a whole curriculum and a school-based culture that essentially teaches knowledge, that teaches information. But I think one of the things that we don't do enough about, and this is where your passion comment, your question comes to me, very vividly, is it is not so much knowledge or information that matters. It is imagination. Describing the world is one thing, but reimagining the world is where the real power lies. And this is not something that we are taught either in our families or in our schools very well. But I often say that I don't need to worry too much about losing my ideas to other people, right? Because I know that I will always produce new ideas, right? So intellectual property for me is nothing so sacred that I worry about whether this idea will be stolen. So as I speak to you now, I'm not worried whether the human resources manager for 10 other human rights organizations is listening in. I'm not worried about all those directors out there that might take some of the ideas that I've shared about Amnesty International Kenya. In fact, if anything, I offer these ideas to them to improve and to develop, because ultimately, how we all win is to have organizations improving on each other's ideas and sharing as they go along. I have an elder friend by the name of Eli Monjao, and he is the curator owner of Paya Pa Gallery out in Kiambu. And he has a sign as you drive into the compound. He has this wonderful sign that says, "Don't photocopy, it puts God to sleep."
I do like that.
Isn't that beautiful, huh?
I do like that. I'm talking about photocopy. So, what do you tell people that believe in fake till you make it?
No, I don't think you have to fake till you make it. I think you just have to show up. You have to be prepared for the moments, and every moment of transformation is a conversation. If you think about it, right? Every moment in our career that will either advance us or set us back will be a conversation. So how you prepare to have that conversation is what's most important, right? So lies, deception, manipulation, those are the strategies of little people, not big people. Big people come into those spaces clear and prepared for those conversations.
But
right?
if you're desperate, if you are desperate, you just want that work. It doesn't matter what you think of me, as long as you give me that job, that's what I want.
Yeah, little people thinking. That's a little person thinking.
But you actually get the job.
What will you do with it? You'll get a job that you don't know what to do with it. I mean, there's a lovely story. I'm told it's a biblical story, but I've never quite heard it. It's never been reproduced for me biblically, right? But this is the story. 3 men outside building a construction. All of them are doing exactly the same thing. They're breaking rocks to create this construction. The first one looks completely dismayed and frustrated. And somebody walks up to him and says, "Hey, why are you breaking rocks?" And he says, "I'm breaking rocks because I'm building this construction. But to be honest, I wish I had another job. I wish I was somewhere else. I wish I wasn't here." And then the person goes to the next person who's also doing exactly the same job. And the guy looks at him and says, he's a bit more cheerful, he's smiling. And the guy says, "What do you think about this work?" And he says, "Well, I wish I had another job, but actually I'm quite happy because tonight I go home with 500 bob, so I can actually feed my family, So I'm enjoying, at least the fact that I've got a job." And then he moves to the third guy. And the third guy is like singing praise songs, like he's singing hymns, Christian hymns. And he seems like he's like in a different world. And the guy says to him, "Listen, how come you're doing exactly the same job as the last two guys? But you're supposed to be happy, in fact, even glorious." And the guy says, "I'm building a cathedral for my God." 3 men doing exactly the same thing with different attitudes. And that's why I say there is a difference between a little person thinking and a big person thinking and a great person thinking. And anybody who's watching me now, my invitation is aim for the greatness, and you will get the little gains by default.
Talking about thinking, and I know we're running out of time now, but I can't let you go without talking about critical thinking. And you find that nowadays it doesn't really matter. Again, correct me if I'm wrong here, Irungu, but you find that lots of people that are very happy to compromise their values to get opportunities. It doesn't matter whether in Kenya, wherever we are, and the ability to analyze or to actually, look at things, in a perspective of great man thinking is not really there. And I want to talk about that in the context of young people, really, because look, I went to school in Kenya. Well, my first degree I did in Kenya, and I don't remember talking about critical thinking in a class really. So, with your experience, as a leader as well, what's the role of critical thinking when it comes to opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, critical thinking and imagination are probably the 2 most important soft skills that anybody who seeks to lead, to have a successful career, to leave an impact that will be bigger than their lives, will have to do, and I think we'll have to I guess create mastery in. So I personally, I have, I kind of like owe a lot of my thinking to something called landmark education. And landmark education, it's a personal transformation curriculum for living. There is the Landmark Forum. There are a number of seminars, including excellent seminars. There are introduction leaders programs or leadership programs. And I'm about to do another program. So imagine at the age of 55, I'm still doing personal transformation courses.
Did you say 55?
Yes, 55, I'm counting.
No way, not a chance. I don't believe that.
You thought we're age mates. I'm flattered.
No, seriously. I was going to ask this as well. That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I say, you're like let's start this, Irungu. What is the secret then?
The secret is three things. Drink lots of water, don't take yourself seriously, and laugh often.
Good, you look very well. But please carry on.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think the first thing is that life, and this is I guess the point is that curiosity, retaining a sense of curiosity, a sense of inquiry, is probably the most important thing for everybody to maintain, whether they are 55, 25, or anywhere in between. I think it is so important that you continue to be curious about the world around you. So education is lifelong, right? But the kind of education that really matters is the kind of education that allows you to be able to understand power and its exercise in society or in families or in communities. Secondly, that you are clear in terms of your moral compass. It is so important in this world today that has become so transactional, short-term focused, to retain a sense of purpose that is higher than self, that is able to create a world around you that is something that you would want to live in, consciously, right? That you're not just passing through. Many of us pass through life like pedestrians, rather than really declaring that we are landlords or landladies in the space that we occupy. And as Muhammad Ali, the boxer once said, our price for being, our rent for being on this earth is that we leave this earth a better place when we move to the next level, So I always say, critical thinking and imagination and a sense of ethics, a sense of a moral compass are the three most important things. And they are far more important than any school, based hard skills that we are taught.
Well, Irungu, I mean, it's unbelievable what you're saying. And I'm just going through some of the texts that people are sending me here. And one person is saying that actually they need to know that Amnesty International Kenya is being run by a Kenyan. People don't see you on TV or I don't know, but there are lots of amazing people doing interesting work in public life, that we don't actually see. So where do you hide?
So unfortunately, by virtue of my work, I don't hide very well. So I'm very active on Twitter. I'm very active on our website, and that's www.amnestykenya.org. Anybody who's watching who's interested in human rights protection work, there are many human rights organizations in this country that are doing great work. Please become familiar with them, reach out to them. We are a membership organization, so we are really interested in working with citizens all over this country in various capacities. And we actually don't think you have to work for Amnesty to be a human rights defender. In fact, the bulk of human rights defenders are 1,600 members, don't work for Amnesty. They are voluntaries. They're volunteers in the communities in which they work. We're now developing structures to be able to support people to do human rights work. And it can be anything. It doesn't have to be, reporting human rights violations. It can also be holding human rights clubs, developing human rights films in communities. So there are many things that people can do that really give them an opportunity to serve and keep their communities safe at all times. So I think that's one thing that I would say. I'm very active on mass media, and if you just type my name, you will see a whole bunch of things. Now, much of that is really work that I've been able to do with colleagues. So behind many of the media kind of hits and whatever, are a group of very dedicated, very passionate activists who work for Amnesty International Kenya, and I'm very proud to just be one of them rather than to be anybody special. That it's really a team that I work with rather than anything else.
Well, you're a very passionate guy. And for those that have just joined us, this is International Varsity School of Soft Skills, and I was talking to Irungu Houston, who works for Amnesty International Kenya. So if anyone is looking for definition of passion, clearly they should listen to you. I mean, it comes out naturally. I can feel it myself. And I think that's what sometimes people look for opportunity miss. They come to the interview, they're very rigid, always in their suits and with their notes, but there's not that kind of freedom, as you say, to express themselves clearly. And I know that you've got lots of experiences, but what form that eloquence, or how can young people learn how to communicate properly when it comes to what they want?
So I think preparation is key. So really thinking about how you want to communicate, what you want to communicate about. Find that what the Japanese call that ikigai, that place that essentially is like this, the place between your passion, your profession, and payment. And really find that space.
So say that again. Let's do that again. So there's passion and what?
So I'm told there's a framework that says this zone in the triangle, your passion, your profession, and your I guess your payment, where you get your salary.
Yes.
If you can find all these three in one space, then you will really be in your element. Too often we take jobs that we're not passionate about, or positions that we are passionate about, but they don't pay the bills, right? And I think the thing for me is always bring passion to whatever you're doing. So you can find passion in all aspects of Amnesty's work. Whether you are the person who is simply at the reception, I tell my colleagues, please bring passion to the reception, because ultimately that energy will find itself in the universe, right? When refugees come to our doors looking for just encouragement, sometimes they need somebody who's compassionate, who's over there with them. They don't need a bureaucrat. When they meet the executive director, they want somebody who can energize them, that can give them an opportunity to see themselves bigger than they might have seen themselves prior to that interaction. And if I can do that for people, then I'm doing my job, and just to say, Kevin, I looked up Matandao Varsity, and in a week I may be speaking to Al Jazeera, I may be speaking to CNN, I may be speaking to 300-400 people in a Rotary group. But I've always retained this understanding that I'm speaking essentially to one or two people in all those spaces, right? And if I can touch somebody, if they can become a leader as a result of the interaction, if I can learn something new from even this interaction, then it matters, right? And I think that's what is really important, is to retain, particularly as you begin to become more influential, more powerful, a sense of humility that says that ultimately it is qua ground that human rights protection takes place.
Wow. Please carry on.
So actually, I think I was almost there. Yeah.
I see. Well, listen. I mean, we can spend here the whole evening talking about some of the skills the young people need, what Amnesty International is doing. But in your position of power, the reality here is Amnesty International is quite a big organization, and I want to assume that the leadership in Kenya sometimes they do listen to what you say, or you get the audience sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, and for me, it doesn't matter. I am so fully self-expressed at the moment that as a human being, that actually I don't wish to disrespect anybody. I don't wish to crowd out anybody's view, but actually, my view, my opinion matters now, right? It's a kind of not a take it or leave it. My job is to actually enroll you. My job is to inspire you. It doesn't matter whether you're a police officer or a staff member of the Kenyan Urban Roads authority, it is so important that I reach the humanity in you that says that no human being should be forcibly evicted. No human being should lose their life without due process, without being able to go through a court of law and be placed on their defense, and if necessary found guilty and charged. But the idea that a police officer should have the entire power to be able to investigate, to apprehend, investigate, prosecute, convict, and execute another human being, that is completely unacceptable. And I'm happy to have that conversation with every police officer in the spirit that I do get that they have a viewpoint of why it is necessary to commit an extrajudicial killing while I hold a position. There's a very good, a distinction that sometimes is made between being, committed to a position, but also not being attached to it, right? So I'm not a demagogue. I can hear difference of opinion, and I can be interested in your different opinion. But at the same time, as a human rights practitioner, there are certain values that I think are critical for a country like Kenya to be able to make sure that 47 million people are kept dignified, that 47 million people are kept safe, and that you and I can have a conversation. We can disagree, but we can also respect each other's point of view without making it personal.
Wow. Listen, I mean, this is the first time, Irungu, I'm receiving more than 20 messages asking questions. And I think, I won't have time for that. But one thing that I want to pick up, and this is the last thing I'm asking you now, is there have been lots of cases where people have been taken advantage of. For example, in the creative sector, where, girls are being asked to sleep with so-and-so so that you can get opportunities, or so you can get a gig. With the experience as Amnesty International, is there a platform or is there a mechanism where this can be reported and obviously anonymously so that young people can be protected? Is there that kind of mechanism that you guys do, or can you talk what's the right direction that people can go when this kind of injustice appear?
Yeah, so there are a number of ways to respond to you on this one. So first of all, unlike many countries across the world, we live in a country in which we have a very strong constitutional and legal regime, right? And there have been attempts to try and water down the constitution over the last 10 years, but ultimately this constitution remains progressive, and most importantly, it remains intact. But a constitution or a set of laws without active citizens is basically just a document, right? And a constitution without institutions that are willing to enforce the law is just a document. So I think, for those of us in civil society, and when I say civil society, I don't mean NGOs, I mean the society of citizens, as opposed to uncivil society, which are the people who violate human rights generally. But those of us who are caring and compassionate human beings, we have an obligation, as we have in Article 1, to essentially familiarize ourselves with the laws and the rights that we have, and essentially to defend those rights. And that defense has to be conversation by conversation. It has to be moment by moment. It is not Amnesty International growing 20 times the size that it is currently to protect those rights for us. It is each of us in the spaces which we occupy, knowing the rights and finding a voice and an ability to be able to articulate it clearly enough that people cannot take advantage of us. Many of your viewers probably have read Steve Biko, the South African Black Consciousness movement leader. He has a book which is like a classic reading material, and it's called I Write What I Like. And in one of the essays in that book, he talks about how it is really the individual that limits the capacity of the oppressor to oppress them, right? Ngugi wa Thiong'o says, nobody can stand on your back, nobody can rest on your back if your back is upright, right? It is only if you are bowing, if you are bending, that you give people the opportunity to ride on your back. The more we stand up firm, the more we are able to produce the kind of results that we see in the society around it. And this is not just rhetoric. Let me give you the example of one of our most, I guess one of the most inspirational members of Amnesty International Kenya, and that is CPA Spencer Olechikye Sankale, the whistleblower of Masai Mara University, who 2 years ago rose to demonstrate to the nation that 300 million, no less, had been stolen over successive periods by the Vice Chancellor and other members of the public. And he was brave enough to lose his job, and in some cases to have to go into hiding to be able to demonstrate that this was unacceptable. Him and about 5 other whistleblowers. And, you know, he has a phrase that actually, funny enough, was spoken 60 years before he said it. And I thought he had read the original quote and then discovered when I spoke to him that he hadn't. And the quote is this: "It is better to live on your feet than to die on your knees."
Yes.
Right? Now that phrase, as far as I know, was also uttered by another very famous Kenyan, and that was Dedan Kimathi back in 1954. Now, if Dedan Kimathi had not sacrificed his life, you and I would not be having this conversation.
No, you're very right.
Many of your viewers would never have gone to university. And as Gittu Kahingere, and this is perhaps what I want to leave your viewers with, if Gittu Kahingere, the Secretary General of the Mau Mau Federal Veterans Association, who I had the privilege and the honor to escort to get to have him vaccinated back in March earlier this year, alongside the Secretary General of the KMPDU, the medical union. The two of them took their vaccination at the same time. And I can't tell you how powerful that moment was in my eyes, you know? On one hand, a 96-year-old former Mau Mau detainee. On the other hand, a 40-year-old medical doctor. One Kikuyu, one coastal, I think Giriama, in the same space. And I asked the Mau Mau veteran, the Secretary General, I said to him, "Mzee Gitu, what are you present to right now as you take the vaccine, when so many people back in March were frightened to take the vaccine or thought it wouldn't make a difference for the country?" And he said, "Irungu, some of us went to the forest for a time just like this." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "The only reason we went to the forest was to give our children and their children the opportunity to read science and to read health, so that we would have doctors who could vaccinate us in a time like this." Now, you can't make that up. You can't make that up. We have a historical responsibility as this generation to do what that generation did for us 60 years ago. It is not more complicated than that. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. And the soft skills really are not just to serve as human rights defenders. It is to be scientists. It is to be communicators. It is to be historians. It is to be actuarial scientists. It is to be businessmen and women. It is to be entrepreneurs. It is to be all the things that the Mau Mau went to the forest to create for us as a possibility in 1963.
Wow, and well, that's the right note to leave this conversation. You see, what I normally do in this last part of the segment is, and I want to ask my guest to introduce to another guest. For example, I'll introduce to you by going for smiling. So I want you don't have to tell me, but obviously the platform really is to spread or create awareness of skills that are very important that you and I kind of agree on. So I would like you to introduce to my next guest, and obviously the reality is there are people of experience, people that have authority, people that can form an opinion. And so, please, will you bring someone next to me next time? That's a genuine question.
So,
it's
Kevin,
a genuine request.
Yeah, and I'm committed to sharing all my contacts with the world, right? And I tell people that my networks are not mine, right? They are opportunities for other people to meet other people, right? So, give me a topic.
you don't tell a hungry dog that. I will tell you lots of stuff. Listen, well, again, I think critical thinking is very important, and I think young people have to know how to analyze things, how to argue, and how to learn to disagree, politely. Yeah. So if you've got someone in mind, a banker or a lawyer or even a doctor, whoever really that has got passion, soft skills, specifically on critical thinking, I really, really appreciate.
Okay, leave me with that homework. I accept the challenge, Kevin. Let's keep talking by WhatsApp and other means. I will give you and introduce you to a couple of people who may be interested to come on your show. And yeah, let's take it from there. And thanks to Boniface Mwangi, who I admire and it always inspires me in terms of his courage and his commitment and passion to this country. So thanks to Boniface for introducing us.
Indeed, and Irungu, again, obviously, yes, I spoke to Boniface, and I that you're coming today. But also to you, I know you're a very busy man, but you're very good in communication. I say we have never met, but I look forward to having a coffee with you, definitely. I think we share lots of things in common. For our viewers, this has been Tala University School of Soft Skills. I'll be talking to, I cannot pronounce your second name, Irungu.
It's a very easy name.
No, it's not.
Houghton.
Oh, goodness me. So it's not Houston, America. No, it's Houghton.
Not Houston, Texas. It is Houghton.
Houghton. Well, listen, it has been absolutely pleasure having you here. And as I say, people look at you as untouchable. I mean, Amnesty International is huge. But I've got to mention this. And as a human rights defender myself, and I live in the UK, Amnesty International UK were in trouble. The reasons, they were trying to discriminate against specific employees. I do know that you're different chapters, so you don't really subscribe to some of what leaders of Amnesty International UK believed in.
No, but I can speak to that very quickly. I mean, you've opened another topic that's very keen to my heart. In the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, many international organizations that have decades of history. I mean, Amnesty is 60 years old. Now, in terms of generations, that's 3 generations, right? Every generation is roughly between 15 and 20 years. So 3 generations of human rights defenders. It is a fact that it started in a part of the world that was the center of the imperial empire. And one would, expect that there are cultures that come with that history, and that also any organization that is, I guess what you'd say, headquartered in one part of the world, even if we move that headquarter to Nairobi, the Kenyanisms would begin to develop, right? Yes. So we have been challenging, and the director who resigned recently, Kate Allen, who I've had the opportunity to work with, and I'll just say this, is a wonderful human being, right? Is completely committed to an end to discrimination and so on. When I looked at the complaints from a number of people in the UK, obviously what it generated for us is a deeper search for greater diversity, greater African and Asian and Latin American leadership. And I have offered to the Amnesty UK team to really think about how do you create a new movement that is built on the Black, Brown, the people of color that are in the United Kingdom at the moment, right? So people like you, Vincent, Kevin, you can become an active member of Amnesty and really become the director of Amnesty. We've made a couple of interesting appointments recently globally. You'd be interested and happy to hear that the director of Amnesty International Canada is a Burundian refugee woman who used to live in Kenya and actually left Burundi fearing for her life. She now runs the Canadian chapter of Amnesty. And I keep challenging, the European and the American chapters. The more that we see a diversity of leadership, the more we'll be able to change these dynamics. So yeah, keep challenging us, keep demanding diversity, keep demanding anti-racist, anti-discriminatory practices within Amnesty UK. And just rest assured that there are people within Amnesty's movement that share these concerns and share a sense of urgency that this shifts as quickly as possible.
Well put. Listen, thank you so much for your time, Irungu, and I look forward to continue the discussion with you.
All the best, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Thank you.